In this lab, we're going to explore the big green hand. And this is a methodology that came to me when I was in my 40s. I had been through lots of schooling up until that time. I had been through college, I had been through graduate school, I'd been through law school, and in all of that schooling, no one ever introduced me to the idea that there is a way to know if my thinking, if what I'm trying to figure out has been well reasoned. And when I discovered this methodology, it actually took me months of struggle and some level of self-doubt and humiliation, because I couldn't imagine that all those years I had sat in all of those classes being taught by all of those teachers and professors, and no one ever introduced me to the idea that it doesn't matter what I was trying to figure out. There's a way to know if my idea is sound and compelling, that it's a good idea, or if someone else's idea is a good idea. And consequently, I was more influenced by personality and position and politics and power than I needed to be, because I didn't know that there was a way to test my own thinking and a structure to use to guide me to think more effectively in the process of thinking. And I call this a system of living thinking. It's living in the sense that it's never fixed. It's always in metamorphosis. It doesn't mean that it's not real. What it means is that it's always in metamorphosis. But I can count on it over time because I understand the dynamics that are in play in my own thinking, which is in my own head or in my own heart, but I am able to navigate because I understand the things that before I was thinking about, I just didn't know that there was a framework in which I was thinking about them, and that it would be enormously helpful if I could see that framework, if I could use it as a reference point so that I would be able to feel more confident about my own judgment. So what we're going to meet is a system of living thinking. That system is, like any system, filled with elements that are interacting with each other on a regular basis, sometimes in a predictable way, but not always. And that those elements live in a culture. They live in a context that can either nourish them or can be toxic to them. And so we're going to look at the elements in this system of living thinking. And I'm going to introduce them today so that you have a chance to see how anywhere you go and everywhere you go, you have your hand with you. And as you learn these elements, you can look at your hand in any meeting or any situation, and you can ask yourself questions. And those questions will help you become much more discerning in your thinking so that you feel like you've been comprehensive and you've thought of all of the relevant things that need to be thought about to inform your judgment. First of all, in this green hand, I like to look at the palm of my hand. And that is higher purpose. Why am I thinking about this? What is my motive? What are my beliefs and my worldview that sit behind that? Because that's going to inform whether or not any given opportunity is going to be consistent with where I'm trying to go. A higher purpose is kind of a North Star. We don't ever expect to actually arrive, but we use it to help us orient and direct our steps along the way. Nor do we expect that all of those steps are going to be in any kind of linear path. Actually, life isn't like that in my experience. I go a little bit this way, and then I go a little bit more toward the north, and then I go a little bit this way, and then I go. And so it seems like it's a meandering path when you're along it, but once you get further down the line, you can look back and you can see that you are continually orienting and reorienting to higher purpose. But if you don't know what your higher purpose is, then any opportunity will do, or anything will seem like a problem. So these two elements of the system are very tightly connected. And we need, in order to write an effective opportunity statement, the opportunity is, simply clearly stated, we need to know how that's leading us toward our higher purpose. Where's the cause and effect, and how do we see that? So higher purpose is right in the palm of our hand. Opportunity statement is the pointer finger, because that's focusing on what it is we're trying to figure out. The higher purpose is really more why we're trying to figure it out, why it matters to us. We need to look at our thumb, and we need to begin to identify what are the assumptions that we're making. What are we counting on to be true in order for this opportunity to be a good opportunity? What are we counting on to be true? And an assumption is a belief or a fact or a condition that we have say, I'm assuming that such and such is true. And we need, from our assumptions, when they're really important to us achieving our opportunity, we have to be able to know how certain are we. And when it's a really significant assumption, and we have a really low level of certainty about whether or not it's true, then that creates a research path. And that research path asks us to identify what is the indispensable information we're going to need in order to raise that level of certainty higher. So that instead of something being just an assumption that's a really important assumption for our opportunity, but we have no idea if it's true, now we've gathered the relevant information, the indispensable information, and information that's valid because we've done as much as we can with the resources we have to establish that our assumptions, now we can be much more confident about them moving forward. But they're always going to be an open question because we're always assuming things. We can never be 100% certain of anything except maybe our own intentions. So, opportunity statement tied to higher purpose. Assumptions spun off. We've identified our assumptions based on the opportunity, or if we see the problem is, and that's what we're working on, the problem is what? Okay, well, what are we assuming is true about that problem? What are we counting on as being true, and how sure are we that that's true? Another finger on the big green hand is points of view. In any question that's calling for a reasoned judgment, in any opportunity statement that we want to decide, is this a good opportunity for me? Is this opportunity a good one for me now? We have to look at various points of view if we're going to be comprehensive in our thinking. And so that means identifying all of the relevant points of view and inviting them to weigh in. What do they see when they look at our opportunity statement? What do they see when they look at our problem statement or the question and issue? So we want to get diverse perspectives. We want people who are not us looking at what we're thinking about and giving us their take. It doesn't mean that we have to accept everything that they say, but if we don't ask, that's a statement in and of itself. It means that we don't want to know. But in fact, we do want to know because we're looking toward objectivity, objective standards to decide whether the idea that we're wanting to pursue or the opportunity is a good one. So we identify the points of view, we ask them to look at our opportunity statement, we ask them to look at some of our assumptions. We might even discuss with them how our higher purpose, how our opportunity statement and our higher purpose are connected. But once we see that this is actually what effective thinkers think about, then we start to become more fluid or more fluent in the language of thinking. Because we're working in a system and all of these things are connected. We need to look at the core concepts, the very words that we're using. And some of my former students, my GreenMBA students, used to go, oh, core concepts, that's not a big deal. We know what these words are. But it turned out that many of them, at the end of the day and at the end of the course, realized that so much of the confusion in their own thinking had to do with the words that they were using, and that the words that they had chosen to use were not the best words, and in fact were taking them off one track and off another. and also making it much more difficult for other people to follow with them because the words that they were using were not the best choice. But they didn't know how to test that before. And they came to see that core concepts was a very important part of the green hand. So we have higher purpose. We have articulating what are we trying to figure out. We have assumptions and indispensable information. We have points of view and core concepts. And we have the last little finger, which is inferences. And inferences is a big category. And this is the leaping horse of thinking. If this is true, then that is true. Or if this is true, then that is possible. Or if this is true, then that is untrue. Or if this is true, then that is feasible. So these are the leaping steps that we can make based on what we've come to understand so far. And it invites us into the future, because this is really very much about the future, about leading into what's possible, moving ahead. We form a tentative conclusion about our opportunity statement. It's tentative because the world is rapidly changing, and we want to be able to form a tentative conclusion and a scope of work based on that, but we don't want to close our mind to all things that are coming towards us out of the future. We want to be flexible and stay on the balls of our feet and be anticipating and looking for new information to challenge our assumptions instead of blocking it out because we don't want to know. So our tentative conclusion lives, and we organize ourselves by it moving forward, but it's always tentative. It can always be reconsidered and adjusted, midstream corrections moving forward, and so forth. And we need to identify the consequences if we move forward with our opportunity. Positive consequences, negative consequences, intended consequences, unintended consequences, aggregated consequences across industries or across time. So these are things that are inferences that we're forming a tentative conclusion. And if we've worked through all of this, we're 99% ahead of where most people are in their thinking, because we've consciously moved through a process that's a living system. And it's a living system that's designed, its purpose is to formulate well-reasoned conclusions, which is not to say that they're right. We only know if something is right after the fact. And that's something that a gentleman, an elder gentleman in Tennessee, taught me one time in a lab that we were working with together. And the difference between a well-reasoned conclusion and a right conclusion is hindsight. And he raised that point, and I thought it was a really brilliant opportunity for him to share his life experience. We can't know if something is right in the present, but we can know if it's well-reasoned, and we can accept multiple well-reasoned conclusions about a particular opportunity statement or problem, because they're going to be based on different values that sit behind the higher purpose. And that's fine. We're way far down the line. This system is nonlinear. You can't just start at one place and go to another. Predictably, it's not the same thing. It's non-sequential. You can come in by questioning a word that's being spoken in a meeting, or a point of view that you think needs to be considered in a discussion. You can come in from a higher purpose of reverting back. What is our higher purpose? Why are we doing this? What is our motive? What is our intention? How does this opportunity statement connect to that? So it's nonlinear, it's non-sequential, it's self-correcting, which is a very powerful idea if you think about it. It means because I start to look at a word that's in my higher purpose statement, or a word that's in the opportunity statement that I'm considering, and I realize that word is could be two, I'm not sure which A or B that I really mean. And that's called up to me. And now then I go back and I recraft this, or I recraft this and then this. So this is a crafting process. It's not something that you can ever say, oh, I'm done. And as Bill McDonough said, one of the real pioneers in my thinking, Bill McDonough, from Cradle to Cradle, he said the idea of done is done. And we have to live in this much more fluid, this much more malleable environment if we're going to be effective in forming well-reasoned conclusions. We're never going to be done because this is the future and the new conditions are always changing. And we have to be okay with that. But that doesn't mean that we just punt and do whatever we feel like it. What it does mean is that we can harness our thinking in a much more disciplined process to formulate predictable, well-reasoned conclusions. And as the future is coming toward us, we can make the adjustments much more easily. The other power of a living system like this, a system of living thinking, is that other people can share the framework, and we can now talk openly and candidly and non-defensively about how we think, not just what we think. And I'd like you to consider that again, going from I think to we think, and the power of the group thinking to enhance the quality of the reasoning, and the power of the individual thinking to support what the group is considering. These are very powerful, and we're compromised extraordinarily right now because all we can do is talk about what we think, not how we think. And what we think by its very nature forms premature conclusions because we're not able to look at what is a disciplined process, and this is a disciplined process. Yes, it's nonlinear. Yes, it's non-sequential. But if I'm able to ask you, tell me some of the assumptions that you're making about the proposition at hand, that's a very different question than, so that's what you think, huh? Or some other sort of aggressive interaction, because we don't have anything better. This is better. This is a path of effective collaboration through effective thinking. And it is a living system of thinking because it's dynamic, it's nonlinear, non-sequential, it's flexible, and it's self-correcting. Like any system, it has its own mechanisms to recalibrate and self-correct. So this is where we're going with the labs, the Applied Critical Thinking Labs, is to develop skills and practices in these different areas and start to play with this challenge of knowing, is my idea a good idea? How can I test this idea to see if it's a good idea? And how can I stand stronger in myself as an individual and as a member of a team if I'm able to do that?